Bitwise, a key asset manager, has now released its Bitcoin predictions for 2025. Among other things, a Bitcoin prediction of a certain dollar amount. In the bull case, they even expect a Bitcoin price in the millions. They also anticipate that Bitcoin will surpass gold's market capitalization by 2029. In the bull case, they even expect a Bitcoin price in the millions. They also expect that Bitcoin will surpass gold's market capitalization by 2029. This is a super relevant report they've published here. 21, because we're now seeing more and more asset managers, big financial service providers throwing out their Bitcoin predictions. They've just released a whole report. We're going to take a look at this report because some serious price bombs are being leaked here. They've just released a whole report here. We're taking a look at this report because some serious price bombs are being leaked here. And that's really what a lot of people are expecting, that 2025 will be the big year for Bitcoin. Bitwise predicted this too, and now we're going to check it all out. And that's really what a lot of people are assuming now, that 2025 is going to be Bitcoin's big year. Bitwise also predicted this, and we are now looking at everything. I know you always have to look at predictions and anything related to the future with a lot of skepticism. What's really important is that there are a lot of predictions included here that don't just say, okay, by this date, the Bitcoin price will hit this amount, but rather more general things like Bitcoin will reach gold's market capitalization, or new countries will come on board with a Bitcoin reserve strategy. So, it's not just some blunt price projections. There are also reasons included for why this will happen. And that's the interesting part. It's not possible to say exactly, okay, on this date, Bitcoin will be at this price, but rather that you can really assess the trends of Bitcoin accurately. And we have about 10 key predictions and a bonus prediction. It just starts off really bluntly with the Bitcoin price. Here, the case is made that we could see a Bitcoin price of a certain dollar amount unless Donald Trump implements a Bitcoin reserve strategy. So by 2025, we're looking at a Bitcoin price of $500,000. So that's $500,000. And now they also explain why they're so bullish on Bitcoin. $1 million isn't even that overly bullish. I mean, sure, it's the bull case, but that's actually still a relatively conservative price target for 2025. That would be a limited doubling. They say here that the record-breaking inflows into Bitcoin ETFs have driven Bitcoin to new all-time highs in 2024. We don't expect this trend to slow down anytime soon. Look at prediction 2. Demand and supply reduction from April 2024 having plus new purchases. If US sets a Bitcoin reserve, price could hit $1 million. 2024, as well as new purchases by companies and governments. We've seen this before. If the US government sets up a Bitcoin reserve of 1 million Bitcoins, the price could hit $1 million. The bear case is if the US accumulates less than 1 million Bitcoins. If they accumulate 1 million or more, the Bitcoin price will rise. Bitcoin ETFs matter, and other countries will buy Bitcoin. The bear case is if the US accumulates less than 1 million Bitcoins. If they gather 1 million or more, Bitcoin's price will rise. Significantly, nation-states will purchase Bitcoin, possibly on a smaller scale. If it's the US, they'll definitely raise their price target. You say here quite clearly that Bitcoin ETFs are relevant and that other countries will also buy Bitcoin. They clearly state that countries, including nation-states, will buy Bitcoin, possibly on a smaller scale. If it's the US, they'll raise their price target. General adoption is expected to accelerate, with more channels for capital to flow into Bitcoin. The halving mechanism means Bitcoin supply doesn't increase with demand. It halves every 4 years. This could lead to a minimum and, in a bull case, over $1 million. And then we have the halving mechanisms, which means it's not like a regular commodity where the supply increases when demand goes up. With Bitcoin, the supply stays the same, and it actually gets cut in half every 4 years. Then you get to the minimum, and in the best case, in the bull case, even over $1 million. And then the second prediction, and this one is really, really important and crucial. And here they say that Bitcoin ETFs will accumulate more capital in 2025 than in 2024. And often it's like this. A new Bitcoin ETF gets introduced, and then, for example, at the beginning, there's a ton of inflow, and then it naturally levels off. At some point, the inflows into Bitcoin are going to level off, and the Bitcoin ETFs won't see such massive inflows anymore. I'm pretty sure about that. But they make it very clear that the inflows will increase again in 2025. I need to check if they mentioned how much. No, it just says they'll have more inflows than in 2024. That means we're seeing a huge influx of capital coming in, even more capital. And then it could also be the case that in 2026 or 2027, the inflows will keep increasing because Bitcoin is becoming more interesting, the market cap is rising, and even more people want to invest in Bitcoin ETFs. At the same time, what's interesting is that at some point, there will be a saturation point. That could be 2030, 2035, or 2040, but at some point, it's going to level off. However, they really expect an initial exponential growth, almost like an S-curve adoption. The inflows are going to keep increasing more and more until we eventually hit a saturation point. But that saturation isn't happening next year. It's much, much later, and then it will level off again at some point. What will be interesting now is that the Bitcoin ETFs have now accumulated almost 1 million in Bitcoins, and now I am making a prediction that the US dollar flows will probably increase, meaning that we will have more US dollar flows in Bitcoin ETFs than last year, at least if we go by the prediction here. But I can't imagine that the Bitcoin inflows will be higher than last year because we have to assume that the Bitcoin price is constantly rising. There's slippage, meaning for the dollars you invest in Bitcoin, you get less Bitcoin. We've driven the Bitcoin price up in US dollars. So with the same cash, you're getting less Bitcoin. This issue affects MicroStrategy, BlackRock, and others. As Bitcoin's price rises, you get less Bitcoin. The prediction isn't far-fetched. Inflows are increasing in dollar terms, but in Bitcoin terms, they might be less. They argue Coinbase will surpass Charles Schwab, becoming the most valuable brokerage with a $700 share price. So I would say, yeah, the prediction isn't too far-fetched that the inflows are increasing in dollar terms, but in terms of Bitcoin, it could even be that the inflows are less. Then they make the case that Coinbase will surpass Charles Schwab and become the most valuable brokerage house in the world with a share price of $700. So the Coinbase stock will be worth $700. And that's a really interesting prediction because then Coinbase would be like the most relevant broker in the world or something, or the most relevant financial house in the world, even surpassing Charles Schwab. I think that needs a bit of correction, not the most relevant, but definitely a bigger brokerage provider than Charles Schwab, and that says a lot. And of course, it's a message to the industry, hey folks, with your traditional financial products, your ETFs and all that, that's all nice and good, and your savings accounts and blah, 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 but Coinbase with Bitcoin is such a relevant market, and of course, all the shitcoins too. I see things a bit critically with Coinbase. I've heard before that accounts have been censored or frozen, and then it was really, really difficult to get access to the funds again. The site was down and whatever. It's a big house, though. I mean, you can see it negatively. I haven't had great experiences with it, not personally, but from what I've heard. I always recommend 21 Bitcoin. I'll drop a link for you down below. Super easy, simple. I've never heard of any problems like accounts getting frozen or the app crashing or any technical issues like that. Of course, things like that can always happen, but I've had really good experiences with it. I'm dropping a link down below for Bitcoin. You can use it super easily. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can even save up to 20% on the fees when buying Bitcoin. And then we come to the next prediction. I'm skipping over a couple here because there are also some crypto predictions that a new crypto IPO hype is going to break out and that there are AI tokens and stuff like that. That's actually irrelevant for us here, especially if we're focused solely on Bitcoin. Don't know. 6. That's the number of countries that are betting on Bitcoin, so they have a Bitcoin reserve strategy or, for example, also holding Bitcoin, saving Bitcoin. Right now there are about 6 or 7 countries like El Salvador, then the USA with almost Bitcoin, then there's the UK with Bitcoin, Finland with 90 Bitcoin, also funny, Bhutan with Bitcoin, Ukraine with Bitcoin, Georgia with 66 Bitcoin, China with Bitcoin, El Salvador with Bitcoin, and Venezuela with 240 Bitcoin. So there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 countries. And this number of countries that publicly hold Bitcoin is going to at least double. So we're going from 9 to 18, and you can already see that it took us so long to get to 9 countries using Bitcoin, and now that number is going to double. Bitwise really expects a Bitcoin hype in 2025. And then we have the next prediction, which is that Coinbase will be added to the S&P 500 and MicroStrategy to the NASDAQ 100. And that's going to massively boost Bitcoin again. That means adding crypto exposure to nearly every US investor's portfolio, so either through MicroStrategy or through Coinbase. And with MicroStrategy, we already know that it's very likely going to go live this Friday on the NASDAQ. And then Coinbase will also be added to the S&P 500. That's definitely a big deal. And that's what I always say, you can't ignore Bitcoin whether you like it or not. And Bitwise sees it the same way. Then we have the next prediction that the US Department of Labor wants to relax its guidance against crypto in 401k plans, meaning that you can increasingly invest in Bitcoin through these retirement plans in the US. There are currently options available, but they're pretty limited. I think you can only do that through vehicles like MicroStrategy and stuff like that. I don't think you can hold Bitcoin directly. And here it says enabling billions of dollars to flow into crypto assets, meaning that apparently you can also invest directly in Bitcoin through a 401k. You might not care too much about this, but it definitely brings even more flows to Bitcoin if you can pump money directly into Bitcoin through the retirement plan in the US. I can definitely see Donald Trump opening all the floodgates when it comes to regulation, which is currently making things a bit tricky. So it says here, stablecoin assets will double to 400 billion as the US passes long-awaited stablecoin legislation. So the adoption of stablecoins is really going to take off. And when we have massive stablecoin adoption, the money will sooner or later flow into Bitcoin as well. Stablecoins are a gateway for new money to flow into Bitcoin. And it would be pretty intense if the adoption surge picks up a bit more. And the craziest prediction they made here was that Bitcoin will catch up to the gold market by 2029. So then Peter Schiff and all the gold bugs are really going to be in for a shock when Bitcoin surpasses gold in market capitalization. And by then, the market capitalization of gold is probably going to be much, much higher. We're saying here that we believe Bitcoin will surpass the gold market by 2029. With the current market capitalization of gold, that would mean the price of Bitcoin would have to rise to over $1 million per coin. By 2029, they're saying here, Bitcoin has historically moved in 4-year cycles. Although there's no guarantee that this will continue, 2029 could mark the peak of the next cycle, as well as the anniversary of Bitcoin's creation. Bitcoin is predicted to surpass gold due to its verifiability, divisibility, transportability, and scarcity. And then they add as a note, if the US government were to announce that they're buying 1 million Bitcoin for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we could hit the $1 million mark per Bitcoin much faster. So this is the ultra bullish prediction because they just say Bitcoin is better than gold. It's more verifiable, more divisible, easier to transport, scarcer, and so on. Bitcoin has massive advantages over gold, and that's why it's inevitable that Bitcoin will surpass gold in market capitalization. Now they've actually made a forecast about how Bitcoin will develop. They just leave the years 2025 to 2028 blank. Only in 2029 will Bitcoin be at $1 million US. That's a gain of 885%. And what's really special is that the different 4-year cycles are highlighted here. Here you can see, for example, that the current cycle we're in is marked as the mainstream cycle. So this is the cycle where Bitcoin will find its way into the mainstream, according to Bitwise. And from 2027 to 2030, that's the golden cycle, the golden cycle. That's also what Michael Saylor calls the gold rush, where basically by 2030, almost all Bitcoin will be mined. 99% of Bitcoins won't be mined until 2024, not 2024, but 2030. And that's a very, very exciting perspective here on Bitcoin from Bitwise and just underscores how bullish Bitwise is here. It's worth mentioning that Bitwise has an interest in pushing Bitcoin up themselves. But the nice thing is that there are now so many parties that have a vested interest in massively pumping Bitcoin. Bitwise has an interest in selling Bitcoin ETFs. But that's the beauty of it. There are now so many parties with a real interest in massively pumping Bitcoin up. The whole Trump mafia, Bitwise, BlackRock, Michael Saylor, MicroStrategy, Larry Fink, and so on, all the powerful people in the world now have the incentive to pump Bitcoin up massively. And that's probably what will play out over the next 5 or 10 years, that Bitcoin will just find its way. And whether Bitcoin will exceed the million mark in 2029 or whether it will be much earlier, no one can say. But in any case, we have now made Bitcoin's bullish case very clear here. And if you're feeling FOMO right now, fear of missing out, as they say in the Bitcoin space, just know that FOMO is usually not a good guide. It often leads to making poor decisions. But often you get FOMO when you, for example, if you see such videos or if you see such forecasts here, then you can of course also decide to buy Bitcoin. But this isn't financial advice. Everyone has to figure that out for themselves. And then I'll put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily, safely, and very cheaply buy Bitcoin. With the code BitcoinHotel, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I'm signing off here from El Salvador. Up there, you can still see the moon. To the moon. That's where we're headed soon. You see this here? Just wait. We're headed there soon. To the moon with Bitcoin. I'm signing off. See you later. Peace out. Usend.